The Softube CL-1B is a digital emulation or model of the TubeTech opto compressor. In hardware form, this compressor depends on an optical light sensor to detect the signal to be compressed. Characteristics of an opto compressor are very smooth compression that can be applied with a high amount of gain reduction when necessary without the signal sounding over-compressed or over-processed. The hardware version of this compressor has a completely analog signal path, with the only semiconductor components showing up in the sidechain detector. Because of this, the TubeTech compressor is typically used on the most important instruments or aspects of a mix. For instance, the lead vocals or also other lead instruments. Softube has modeled all the features of the hardware compressor, and I'm going to be demonstrating them and also how the compressor sounds by processing an electric bass track. Let me go ahead and play you back what the song sounds like, and then I'll solo the bass so you can hear what it's like without being processed by the compressor. Right now, I have the plug-in and bypass mode. Let me go ahead and kick on the compressor. This is just in the initial settings when the compressor is first opened. For anyone that's used a compressor before, a lot of the controls and features will seem very familiar. You have a gain control right here, and this is kind of like an output or makeup gain that can be used because you're going to be using the compressor to decrease the gain of the input signal. How it works is you choose a ratio. I'll just leave it in the initial setting right now. This is a 6:1 ratio. And you just increase the threshold, and you'll see over here on the gain reduction meter the amount of gain that is actually being reduced depending on the threshold and the ratio. So I'll start with the threshold off and then increase it, and you can hear how it sounds with higher and higher gain reduction. I'm going to go ahead and after I do the gain reduction, kind of use some makeup gain. That way I can bypass it and you can hear really what the compressor is doing. So right now I'm up around 7 to 10 dB of gain reduction. So I use that for makeup. What I'll do is bypass it. So this is unprocessed. Hopefully you can hear that this compressor is really squeezing the signal. This might be even more compression than I would typically want to use. And one thing that you can do to control this is to vary the ratio. So right now it's at a 6:1 ratio. So for every 6 dB above the threshold, the compressor is only going to allow 1 dB through. So let me back it off to all the way down to a 2:1 ratio is the lowest one, and the highest one is 10:1. I'm going to go back. I'm going to shoot for around 5 dB of compression. So I'm going to set my makeup gain. You can see down here on the meter, that will tell you exactly the setting that you're manipulating with the knob. So I'll start out with a 2:1 ratio, play around with the threshold. You can hear how that sounds. On the other hand, you can use a higher ratio. This is almost getting to the range where you're using it as a limiter. And just so you can see, you have the meter over here that you can adjust between the input level, the compression, which is basically gain reduction, and also output. So I'll show you how these respond. Typically, I like to leave it just on compression. What I haven't really talked about down here is the attack and release settings, and also the attack release select knob. So for people that are familiar with optocompressors, one very famous optocompressor is the LA2A. On that compressor, you don't have control over the attack and release, that they're fixed and determined inside of the compressor. With the TubeTech CL-1B, you have control over the attack and release, making it much more versatile. In the manual mode of attack and release, these knobs behave very much like you would expect. The attack can be varied all the way down from half of 1 millisecond and can go all the way up to 50 milliseconds. Oh, excuse me, to 300 milliseconds. The release knob on its fastest setting is 50 milliseconds and can go all the way up to 10 seconds. So what I'll do is just show you a couple different ways of using the compressor with a fast attack, fast release, and that'll squash the transient of the incoming signal. Then I'll show you some other ones if you want to accomplish different things. Similarly, you could have a slower attack and a slower release if you want the attack of the transient of each note to pass through the compressor, but then to really compress the tail of the notes. In the fixed mode, you don't have the ability to change the attack and release, and these are actually fixed to 1 millisecond attack and 50 millisecond release. I'll play it back and so you can hear that. On the fixed manual control, this one's a little bit more complicated. The actual attack time is fixed just like it is for the fixed control. However, the release control is then can be used to vary that, and the attack control is a little bit different, a little bit more complicated. Although the actual attack of the compressor is fixed, what you can do is use this knob actually as a way of delaying the release response of the compressor. So it's a little bit more complicated and only can be probably heard if you're using different kinds of instruments, but I'll play it back and give you an idea. So here I'm delaying the release function of the compressor. With this one, it's behaving very much like the fixed attack. Overall, Softube has done a great job modeling the CL-1B. It's a very popular compressor and very important compressor because many times it's used on the most important elements of a mix.